The rain came down in sheets the night Claire Ashford knocked on a stranger's door. She stood on the porch of a small lakeside house in upstate New York, soaked through, no purse, no phone, no car in sight. She told the man who answered that her rental had broken down 2 miles back and there was no cell signal anywhere on the road. Ryan Calloway looked at her for a long moment. His 6-year-old daughter was asleep down the hall, but the storm was getting worse, and the woman on his porch was shaking. He stepped aside and let her in. Claire woke the next morning to a sound she did not recognize. A child was singing. Not performing, not rehearsing, just singing. The way children do when they believe no one is listening. The melody drifted from the kitchen, thin and sweet, tangled up with the smell of pancake batter and warm butter. Claire lay still on the old corduroy sofa, a wool blanket pulled to her chin, and stared at the ceiling beams above her. Pine, hand-sanded, the kind of ceiling a person builds with their own hands over a long stretch of weekends. A water stain near the far corner had been patched but not painted, and somehow that single imperfection made the whole room feel more honest than any penthouse she had ever slept in. She sat up slowly. Through the doorway she could see Ryan standing at the stove, flipping pancakes with the easy, practiced rhythm of a man who had done this 1,000 mornings in a row. His daughter sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging beneath her chair, a box of crayons open beside her plate. The girl looked up when Claire appeared in the doorway and smiled without a trace of suspicion. "Do you like drawing?" the girl asked. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. She could not remember the last time someone had asked her a question that simple. "I used to," she said. "I'm Sophie." The girl pulled a blank sheet of paper from a stack on the table and pushed it toward Claire. "You can sit here." Ryan glanced over his shoulder. "Coffee's on the counter," he said. Nothing more. No questions about who she was or where she had come from. No curiosity beyond the immediate fact of her presence. He set a plate of pancakes in front of his daughter, then placed another at the empty seat beside her, the one Sophie had just offered to a stranger. While they ate, Sophie drew. She worked quickly and without hesitation, the way all children draw before someone teaches them to doubt their lines. When she finished, she slid the paper across the table to Claire. It was a picture of a woman standing in the rain, her hair wild, her arms open. "That's you," Sophie said. "From last night." Claire looked at the drawing for a long time. The crayon lines were uneven, the colors imprecise, and the rain was represented by long purple streaks falling from a sky that was half orange and half gray. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had given her in years. Something tightened behind her ribs, but she kept her expression steady and said, "It's beautiful. Thank you." After breakfast, Ryan asked if there was someone she needed to call. Claire told him she would handle it. Her voice was polite but closed, the voice of a woman accustomed to managing situations, not explaining them. Ryan did not press. He offered to drive her to Walt's repair shop in town, and she accepted. The drive was short, less than 10 minutes along a 2-lane road that curved through birch trees and past a wooden boat landing where a pair of canoes sat overturned on the shore like sleeping animals. The town itself was barely a town, a family-run grocery with hand-lettered signs in the window advertising fresh eggs and local honey, a hardware store with a cat sleeping on a stack of paint cans by the door, a post office the size of a garage, and a diner with a chalkboard menu and a bell that rang when you opened the door. Claire watched it pass through the truck window and felt something shift in her chest. It was like looking at a photograph of a place she had only read about. A place where people left their front doors unlocked and knew each other's dogs by name. A place that moved at the speed of seasons, not quarterly earnings. "It's quiet here," she said. Ryan kept his eyes on the road. "That's the whole point." At the repair shop, a man named Walt, in oil-stained coveralls, looked up Claire's rental and shook his head. The alternator was shot. He would need to order the part from Albany, and it would take at least 2 days, maybe 3. Claire stood in the gravel lot and felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her. She had no cash. Her wallet was still in the center console of the rental. Her phone had died hours before she had knocked on Ryan's door, and she had not thought to grab the charger. She was, for the first time in her adult life, completely without resources. The realization was disorienting, like stepping off a curb that was higher than she expected. Ryan watched her face. He could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the quiet panic of someone who was used to solving problems instantly and now had nothing to solve them with. He did not know who this woman was. He did not know why a person with clothes that expensive would be driving alone on a back road in a rainstorm with no phone charger and no plan. But he knew what it looked like when someone had nowhere to go. "You can stay until your car's fixed," he said. There was a pause. Couch is already broken in anyway. The second day was harder than the first. Claire tried to be useful. She offered to help with laundry and could not figure out the old top loader in the mudroom. She tried to make eggs and burned them black. She attempted to mop the kitchen floor and left it wetter than when she started. Ryan said nothing. He simply redid each task after she walked away, quietly and without commentary, the way a man does when he has long since stopped expecting help from anyone. Claire noticed. She noticed everything: the way he folded Sophie's shirts into perfect squares, the way he wiped down the counters in the same pattern every time, the way the house was small but meticulous, every surface clean, every tool hung in its place on a pegboard above the workbench in the garage. This was a man who had built order out of whatever wreckage life had handed him, and he maintained it the way a sailor maintains a boat, not out of vanity, but because disorder meant sinking. She felt foolish. In her office in Manhattan, she managed budgets that exceeded the gross domestic product of small nations. She negotiated contracts with people who controlled entire industries. She had once closed a deal on a conference call from the back seat of a town car while eating sushi with one hand. And here, in this small house beside a lake, she could not fold a fitted sheet. Sophie, unbothered by any of this, adopted Claire completely. That afternoon, the two of them sat on the porch with a tin of colored pencils, drawing side by side while the lake turned gold in the late sun. Sophie talked the way 6-year-olds talk, in long, winding rivers of thought that jumped from butterflies to astronauts to the color of her favorite cup. Claire listened with an attention she usually reserved for quarterly earnings reports. There was something restorative about it, like listening to music in a language she had once been fluent in and had forgotten. Then Sophie said something that stopped Claire's pencil mid-stroke. "My mom went away," the girl said, her voice as casual as if she were reporting the weather. "She didn't come back." She did not look up from her drawing. Claire set down her pencil. She did not offer words, because there were no words adequate for a 6-year-old's understanding of abandonment. She simply put her arm around Sophie and pulled her close, and Sophie leaned into her without resistance, as if she had been waiting for exactly that. Ryan saw it through the kitchen window. He was washing dishes, and his hands went still in the warm water. He stood there for a long moment, watching the woman he barely knew hold his daughter on the porch, and something cracked open inside him that he had spent 3 years sealing shut. He turned back to the sink and stared at his own hands beneath the running water and did not move for a very long time. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Claire plugged her phone into a charger Ryan had found in a drawer. The screen lit up in the dark living room like a flare. 47 missed calls, dozens of emails, the subject lines climbing in urgency. The name at the top of nearly every notification was the same. Ashford Development's board meeting, urgent. Claire stared at the screen, her face lit blue in the darkness, and then she turned the phone face down on the arm of the sofa. She did not know that Ryan, passing through the hallway on his way to check on Sophie, had seen the screen. He had seen the name. He said nothing, but when he closed his bedroom door that night, he sat on the edge of his bed and wondered who, exactly, was sleeping on his couch. Claire knew. She had seen his shadow in the hallway the moment her phone lit up, and she understood that the window of anonymity had closed. The next morning, she found Ryan on the dock behind the house, sitting in a wooden chair with a mug of coffee, watching the mist lift off the lake. She poured herself a cup from the pot he had left on the counter and walked down the slope to join him. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the occasional slap of water against the pilings and the distant call of a loon somewhere out in the fog. "I owe you an explanation," she said. Ryan took a sip of his coffee. "You don't owe me anything. I run a company in New York," Claire said. "A big one. Real estate development. My father started it. I took over after he died." She paused. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to be that person for a few days. I just wanted to be someone sitting at a kitchen table eating pancakes with a kid who draws pictures of rain." Ryan was quiet for a long time. The mist continued to thin, and the far shore of the lake began to emerge, tree by tree. When he finally spoke, his voice was even. "You could have just said that." "I know." Claire looked down at her coffee. "But people treat me differently when they know. They either want something from me or they decide I'm someone they can't relate to. Either way, I stop being a person and start being a position." She turned to face him. "I didn't want that here. Not with Sophie. Not with you." Ryan set his mug on the arm of his chair and looked at her directly. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had learned to choose his words the way he chose his tools, carefully and with purpose. "I don't care what you run, Claire. I don't care how much money you have or how big your office is. But I care that you weren't straight with me. You slept under my roof. My daughter is in that house. Honesty isn't optional here. It's the foundation." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Claire felt each one. In her world, omission was strategy. Information was currency, and you spent it carefully. But in Ryan's world, this small, deliberate, hand-built world beside a lake truth was not a tool. It was the ground you stood on. Without it, nothing held. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that comes with a but. Just sorry." She held his gaze. "I should have told you the moment I walked through your door." Ryan nodded slowly. He did not smile, and he did not reach for warmth. But something in his posture released, just slightly, like a rope that had been pulled taut for days finally given an inch of slack. "Okay," he said. And that was all. They sat on the dock for another few minutes without speaking. The distance between them was wider, now not hostile, but honest. Claire had told the truth, and the truth had a weight to it that neither of them could pretend away. A fish broke the surface near the pilings, and the ripple spread outward in a slow, perfect circle, and they both watched it until it disappeared. Inside the house, Claire's phone rang. She let it go to voicemail twice before the third call came, and something in her face changed. She excused herself and answered. Ryan stayed on the dock, but he could hear the sharp edges of her voice through the screen door, clipped, controlled, the voice of someone who had spent a career giving orders. When she came back outside, her expression was tight. "That was my co-founder," she said. "The board is voting on a motion of no confidence against me in 5 days. He's been working on this since before I left." She stared out at the lake. "I have to go back." Ryan watched her. Then he watched Sophie through the kitchen window, chasing a butterfly across the backyard, laughing at nothing, alive in the uncomplicated way that only children can be. He saw Claire watching her too, and he saw something cross the woman's face that he recognized the look of a person choosing between the life they had built and the life they wanted. Claire decided to stay one more day. The part for her car was arriving that afternoon, and Walt said it would be ready by evening. She told herself it was practical. She told herself there was no reason to leave before the car was fixed. But the truth, which she kept folded inside her chest like Sophie's drawing, was simpler than that. She was not ready to go. That morning, Ryan had boat parts to deliver to 3 different customers around the lake. Claire asked if she could ride along. He shrugged and said, "Truck's right there." They loaded the bed with propellers and fuel filters and a rebuilt carburetor wrapped in an old towel, and they drove the lake road together while Sophie sat between them, narrating every mailbox, every dog, every interesting rock. At each stop, Claire watched Ryan interact with the people of his town. A retired teacher named Hank who needed a part for his fishing boat and spent 10 minutes asking about Sophie's latest drawings. A couple named the Myers who ran a small marina and insisted on sending Ryan home with a bag of tomatoes from their garden. An elderly woman named Dorothy who grabbed Ryan's arm at her front door and told him he was the only reason her late husband's boat was still on the water. At every house, every dock, every gravel driveway, the pattern was the same. People knew Ryan. They knew his daughter. They asked after him not because they wanted something, but because they cared. Claire sat in the passenger seat and felt the full, strange weight of her own life settle over her. She ran a company with 400 employees. She had an assistant, a driver, a personal trainer, a therapist she saw every other Tuesday. She had a corner office on the 32nd floor of a building with her family name on the lobby wall, and not one person in her life called to ask if she was okay without an agenda attached. Ryan KHOA owned a pickup truck and a toolbox and a house that was smaller than her living room, and he was richer than she had ever been. That afternoon, Ryan took her to meet his mother. June KHOA lived in a yellow farmhouse a mile down the road, with a porch full of potted herbs and a cat that watched the world from the railing with imperial disinterest. June was 62, sharp-eyed, warm-handed, and she studied Claire the way a woman studies someone she suspects her son might care about with precision and without apology. They sat on the porch and drank iced tea while Sophie picked dandelions in the yard. June asked Claire where she was from, and Claire said Manhattan. June asked what she did, and Claire hesitated. "I run a business," she said. June looked at her for a long, quiet moment, and then said, "You look like someone who's been running so long you forgot what you're running from." Claire did not answer. Her eyes went red at the edges, and she turned her head to watch Sophie. On the drive home, Ryan spoke about his ex-wife for the first time. Her name was Jenna. She had grown up in the next town over, married Ryan at 24, and left when Sophie was 2. She told him the town was too small for her dreams. She said she needed more. Ryan did not speak about her with anger. He spoke about her the way you speak about a wound that has healed but left a scar you can feel when the weather changes. Claire listened without interrupting. She understood what he was telling her without him having to say it. He had been left before by a woman who wanted a bigger world, and he was not willing to go through that again. The car was ready by 6 o'clock. Walt called and said it was running fine, good as new, and Claire could pick it up whenever she liked. She thanked him and hung up the phone and stood in Ryan's kitchen for a full minute without moving. Through the window, she could see Sophie on the dock, lying on her stomach, trailing her fingers in the water. Ryan was beside her, sanding a piece of wood for a project Claire would never see finished. She packed her things, which amounted to nothing. She had arrived with nothing and was leaving with nothing, except for a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket. Sophie's drawing. The girl in the rain. When she came to the porch to say goodbye, Sophie was already crying. The girl ran to her and wrapped her arms around Claire's legs and held on with the desperate, full-body grip of a child who has already learned that people leave and do not come back. Claire knelt down. She took Sophie's face in her hands, gently, and said, "I'll come back. I promise." Ryan stood on the porch steps with his arms crossed. He did not say goodbye. He did not tell her to drive safe or to keep in touch. He watched her with the careful stillness of a man who had heard that promise before, in a different voice, on a different day, and had spent 3 years learning to live without the person who made it. Claire drove south. The lake road became a highway, and the highway became an interstate, and the farmland became suburbs, and then the gray geometric sprawl of the metropolitan corridor. She stopped once, at a gas station near the Tappan Zee Bridge, and sat in the car with the engine off. She took the drawing from her pocket and unfolded it on the steering wheel. The girl, in the rain, arms open, hair wild. She pressed her thumb against the crayon lines and felt something give way inside her that she had been holding rigid for years. She cried, not the controlled, private crying she allowed herself in hotel bathrooms and locked offices. She cried the way children cry without strategy, without shame, because the feeling was too big to hold. By the time she reached Manhattan, her face was dry and her voice was steady. She walked into the Ashford Development's offices at 9 the next morning in a gray suit and heels, and Marcus Webb was waiting for her. He was 45, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and he had the smile of a man who had already won. "Claire," he said, "welcome back. We were worried about you." She did not return the smile. "I'm sure you were." Marcus had been busy in her absence. He had spent 3 days calling board members one by one, rearranging alliances, planting the narrative that Claire had suffered a breakdown, that she had abandoned her responsibilities at a critical moment and could no longer be trusted to lead the company her father had built. He told them she had disappeared without explanation, that her phone went unanswered for days, that the company had operated without its CEO during a quarter where 3 major deals were pending. He had lunches, private calls, quiet conversations in hallways. He worked the way all ambitious men work when they smell weakness patiently, precisely, and with the appearance of concern. The vote of no confidence was scheduled for the end of the week. Marcus did not expect it to be close. Claire sat in her office and assessed the damage. Her inbox was a graveyard of unanswered messages. 2 major investors had requested calls. A reporter from the financial press had left 3 voicemails asking about rumors of leadership instability. Marcus had been thorough. He had not simply tried to take her seat, he had built a case that the seat was already empty, but Marcus had also been careless. In his haste to consolidate power, he had moved too fast on a deal that should have waited. Claire found it buried in a string of forwarded emails that his assistant had accidentally copied her on a contract to sell the company's largest undeveloped property to a competitor at well below market value. The commission, routed through a shell company, went directly to Marcus. It was not a power grab. It was fraud. Claire spent the next 48 hours building her case. She pulled financial records, cross-referenced wire transfers, and mapped the shell company back to an account that bore Marcus Webb's name in the incorporation documents. The evidence was clear, but it was not simple. It lived in spreadsheets and legal filings and bank statements, the kind of information that could be easily muddied by a good lawyer and a confident denial. She needed the presentation to be airtight, and she needed the board to actually listen. That was the problem. Marcus had not only poisoned their confidence in her, he had framed the conversation. The board was not meeting to hear evidence of fraud. They were meeting to decide whether Claire was fit to lead. By the time she stood up to speak, half the room would already believe she was unstable. Marcus made his move the day before the meeting. He filed a motion through the company's legal counsel requesting a temporary injunction against Claire's authority as CEO, citing abandonment of duties and erratic behavior. His lawyers were fast, expensive, and precise. Claire's attorney told her she had until the board vote to resolve it, or the injunction would proceed to a formal hearing. She worked through the night. The office was empty except for the security guard and the hum of the air conditioning. At 2 in the morning, she sat back in her chair and stared at the wall across from her desk. There was nothing on it. No photographs, no art, no personal effects of any kind. She had occupied this office for 3 years and left no mark on it. It could have belonged to anyone. She thought about Ryan's house, the handmade shelves, Sophie's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the worn spot on the kitchen floor where he stood every morning making breakfast. Every surface in that house told a story. Her office told nothing. She looked down at her desk. Taped to the corner, half hidden beneath a stack of folders, was the drawing. The girl in the rain. She picked up her phone and called Ryan. He answered on the second ring. It was late, and his voice was heavy with sleep, but he did not ask why she was calling. He just listened. Claire told him about Marcus, about the board, about the injunction. She told him she had the evidence, but was not sure the evidence would be enough, because the room was already stacked against her. She told him she was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that settles into the bones and makes a person wonder whether the thing they are fighting for is worth the fight. Ryan was quiet for a while. She could hear the wind outside his window, the faint creak of his house in the dark. When he spoke, his voice was calm and unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once had to raise it to be heard. "You know who you are, Claire," he said. "Don't let someone else write your story." It was not advice, it was not strategy. It was something simpler and harder to argue with. It was the truth, spoken by someone who had no stake in her company, no interest in her money, no agenda beyond the belief that she was worth believing in. Claire closed her eyes. She pressed the phone against her ear. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it more than she had ever meant those two words. The next morning, Ryan saw a headline on the local news website. Ashford Developments had acquired rights to a large parcel of forested land near his town. The plan was to clear it and build a luxury resort. Ryan read the article twice. He looked at the map embedded in the story and recognized every ridge, every creek, every stand of pine. It was the land Sophie drew pictures of. It was the land he had taught her to name the birds in, and it was about to be leveled by the company run by the woman he had just told to keep fighting. The boardroom was on the 34th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the East River. 8 directors sat around a long walnut table. Marcus Webb sat at one end, his lawyer beside him, a leather portfolio open in front of him. He looked like a man attending a ceremony he had already rehearsed. Claire walked in alone. No lawyer, no allies. Just a woman in a dark suit carrying a thin folder and a flash drive. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "No counsel? I won't need any," Claire said. She took her seat at the opposite end of the table. The chairman opened the meeting with the motion of no confidence. Marcus spoke first. He was polished and methodical. He laid out a timeline of Claire's absence, her lack of communication, the unanswered calls, the canceled meetings. He painted a picture of a leader in crisis, someone who had abandoned her responsibilities at a moment when the company needed decisive action. He was persuasive. Several board members nodded as he spoke. When it was Claire's turn, she did not address the motion. She did not defend her absence or explain where she had been. Instead, she opened her folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "Before we vote on whether I should lead this company," she said, "I think you should see what's been happening while I was away." She connected the flash drive to the conference room screen. The first slide was a contract, the sale of the company's largest property to a competitor, signed by Marcus, at 40% below appraised value. The second slide was the shell company. The third was the wire transfer. The fourth was the incorporation document with Marcus Webb's name on it. The room went silent. Marcus's lawyer leaned in and whispered something urgent. Marcus's face did not change, but his hand, resting on the table, curled slowly into a fist. Claire walked the board through every piece of evidence with the precision of someone who had spent 20 years learning how to make facts speak louder than narratives. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply presented what was there and let the numbers tell the story. She showed them the dates, the dollar amounts, the routing numbers. She showed them the difference between the appraised value and the sale price. She showed them where the missing money had gone. When she finished, she said, "My father built this company to create, to build things that lasted, not to strip assets and pocket the difference. I will not let anyone turn his legacy into a transaction. If this board believes Marcus Webb is a better steward of that legacy, then vote accordingly, but do it with full knowledge of what he's done." The vote was 5-3. Claire kept her seat. Marcus was asked to resign effective immediately and was informed that the matter would be referred to outside counsel for a formal investigation. After the room cleared, Claire sat alone at the long table. The windows were bright with afternoon light. The city stretched out below her, vast and indifferent. She had won. She should have felt relief or triumph, or at least the satisfaction of a fight well fought. But she felt none of those things. She felt hollow. She felt tired. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the drawing. The Girl in the Rain. She looked at it for a long time, and she knew where she needed to go. But first, she had one more thing to do. She called an emergency session with her senior leadership team and announced that the forested property deal was canceled. The land would not be developed. The company would redirect its investment toward sustainable projects, mixed-use communities, green infrastructure, land conservation partnerships. The room was stunned. One executive asked why. Claire looked at him and said, "Because it's not just a forest. It's someone's home." No one in the room knew who she was talking about, but she did. 2 weeks passed. The headlines moved on. The investigation into Marcus Webb proceeded quietly through legal channels. Claire restructured the company's development pipeline, held 3 investor calls, and hired a new chief operating officer. She did all of this from her office in Manhattan, and she did it well because she was good at her job and always had been. But every evening, after the last email was sent and the last call was ended, she sat in her apartment on the Upper West Side and looked at the drawing taped to her refrigerator, and she felt the distance between the life she was living and the life she had glimpsed. On a Friday afternoon, she told her assistant to clear her calendar for the following week. She packed a small bag, not a suitcase, just a canvas duffel with a few changes of clothes and a pair of sneakers she had not worn in years. She drove north. She did not call ahead. Ryan was at the boat landing when she arrived. He was kneeling beside an overturned hull, sanding a patch of fiberglass, his hands rough with work. Sophie was sitting on the grass nearby with a sketchbook, drawing the lake. The sound of tires on gravel made them both look up. Claire stepped out of the car, and she was not the woman who had left. The suit was gone. The heels were gone. She wore jeans and a white t-shirt and canvas shoes, and her hair was down, and she looked like someone who had made a decision she was no longer afraid of. Sophie dropped her sketchbook and ran. She crossed the grass in 3 seconds and threw herself into Claire's arms with such force that Claire staggered back a step and then held on. She held on tight, her face pressed against the girl's hair, and she did not let go for a long time. Ryan stood up slowly. He wiped his hands on a rag and watched. He did not walk toward her. He waited. There was grease on his forearms and sawdust on his jeans, and his face carried the expression of a man who wanted to believe something but had learned the cost of believing too easily. The wind came off the lake and moved through the grass between them, and neither of them spoke, and the moment stretched out the way moments do when everything that matters is balanced on what happens next. Claire set Sophie down and looked at him across 20 feet of grass and gravel. "I kept my promise," she said. Ryan looked at her. Then he looked at Sophie, who was beaming up at Claire with the uncomplicated joy of a child whose faith has been rewarded. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "You did." They walked to the dock. Ryan poured her a cup of coffee from the thermos he kept in his toolbox, and they sat on the edge with their feet hanging over the water. Sophie sat between them, drawing again, already absorbed in her own world. Claire told him about Marcus, about the vote, about the investigation. She told him she had canceled the land deal, the one that would have cleared the forest near his town. Ryan stared at her. He had seen the news about the cancellation but had not connected it to her. "That was you?" he asked. "I thought about what you said," Claire told him, "about knowing who I am." She paused. "I realized I'd been so busy running the company my father built that I forgot to ask what he actually built it for. It wasn't for deals, it wasn't for profit margins. It was to make things that mattered." She looked out at the lake. "This matters." Ryan was quiet. Claire continued. She told him she was not leaving her company, she was restructuring it so she could work remotely part of the time. She was not making grand promises. She was not asking to move in or play house, or pretend that 2 weeks of knowing someone was the same as a lifetime. She said simply, "I'd like to be around. if that's okay." Ryan did not answer with words. He reached over and handed her the cup of coffee, and their fingers touched for a moment on the warm metal, and neither of them pulled away. They sat there, the three of them, watching the light move across the water, and for the first time, the distance between their two worlds did not feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge. 6 months later, the third coffee mug became permanent. It sat on the counter beside Ryan's blue one and Sophie's small yellow one, a simple white mug with a chip on the rim that Claire had bought at the thrift store in town. She drank from it every morning she was there, which was most mornings now. Claire split her time between Manhattan and the lake house. She had opened a small satellite office in town, renting the upstairs room above the hardware store. She hired 3 people from the area, a project coordinator, an assistant, and a young architect. The office had no lobby, no reception desk, and no sign on the door. It had a window that looked out over the lake, and that was enough. Sophie called her Claire. Not Mom, not Aunt, not Miss Ashford, just Claire. And Claire understood that this was not a lesser thing. It was an honest thing. She was not replacing anyone. She was not filling a role. She was simply present, in the way that mattered most, reliably, consistently, without condition. She helped Sophie with her homework at the kitchen table. She read to her before bed on the nights she was there. She learned which stuffed animal Sophie needed to fall asleep and which closet light had to stay on. She learned these things not because anyone asked her to, but because she paid attention, and paying attention is the purest form of love. Ryan still fixed boats. He still made pancakes every morning with the same quiet rhythm. But now there were 3 plates instead of 2, and sometimes Claire stood beside him at the stove, learning how to flip without breaking the edges. And sometimes she failed, and sometimes Sophie laughed, and sometimes Ryan smiled in a way that reached his eyes, in a way it had not reached them in years. June ran into Claire at the farmer's market on a Saturday in October. The leaves were turning, and the air smelled like cider and wood smoke. June looked at her for a long moment and said, "You stopped running." Claire smiled. "Someone gave me a reason to stay." That evening, the 3 of them sat on the porch. Sophie had fallen asleep in Claire's lap, her sketchbook open on the ground beside them, a half-finished drawing of the lake at sunset. Ryan sat in the chair beside Claire, his hand resting on the armrest, close to hers but not touching. The crickets sang. The lake was still. The last light of the day moved across the water like a slow breath, and then it was gone, and the stars came out one by one, and neither of them said a word. They did not need to. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything they had found in each other, and everything they had almost missed, and the quiet, stubborn grace of 2 people who had let a stranger in on a rainy night and discovered that sometimes the thing you were not looking for is exactly the thing you need.